The unbeatable foe, the smell. Good evening, everyone. Tonight we are going to begin with the raw, dirty, and utterly ridiculous reality of the medieval battlefield. You probably imagine the battlefield is sounding like trumpeting fanfares, the clang of swords, and heroic speeches drifting over the hills. In reality, your first opponent is not a knight, nor an arrow. It is the smell. And let me tell you, it is unbeatable. Picture thousands of men for whom bathing is optional, meaning perhaps once a year if the river isn't frozen. Their tunics are stiffened with old sweat, stale ale, and mysterious stains no one wants to investigate. Then add the horses, because nothing says glory like wading through a half-ton of hay-fed gastrointestinal discharge. But wait, there's more. The soldiers camp in filthy lots, tossing food scraps onto the ground and defecating wherever the mood strikes. This is less field of honor and more giant street fire in a garbage dump. You aren't so much breathing the air as you are sipping a medieval smoothie of everything you never wanted to taste. The veterans don't even notice. They are used to it. The guy next to you casually sharpens his spear while you are doubled over retching, wondering why no one mentioned this in the training manual. He gives you a look that says, "First battle, huh?" And you realize, yes, I have already disgraced myself before the fight even began. And this is before anyone has even swung a weapon. You are supposed to brace for the charge, but your body is staging a revolt against your nose. You wanted to stand tall and look like a hero, but instead you are gagging as if you just walked into the world's most terrible tavern outhouse. Modern people underestimate this because we live in a world of soap, deodorant, and garbage collection. You can handle a crowded subway car on a summer afternoon, perhaps even a no-shower weekend music festival. Now, multiply that by 10,000, add livestock, and prank the humidity to unholy. That is your battlefield. So no, you won't have your glorious opening charge. You'll have watering eyes, a spinning head, and a desperate desire to lie down until the wind changes direction. Unfortunately, there is no wind, just a wall of odor so thick you feel you could bottle it and sell it as eau de desperatio. And that is the real ambush. Not the steel, not the arrows, but the air itself. Before the first blow is struck, you have already lost to medieval hygiene. The armor sauna and the deadly mud. You thought armor would make you look like a hero. You envisioned yourself striding across the field, sunlight bouncing off the polished steel, peasants gasping at your radiant presence. Reality check. Armor is not a fashion statement. It is a medieval sauna you cannot take off. Problem number 1, the weight. A full suit can weigh between 50 and 70 pounds, and it is not distributed evenly. You lumber like a metallic tortoise, and every step feels like you were sinking into the ground. Want to swing a sword? Sure, but only once, because by the second swing, your arms are shaking like overcooked noodles. Problem number 2, the heat inside that helmet. It is not heroic. It is a suffocating metal oven. Your breath fogs the visor until you can't see, and the only breeze you feel is the faint smell of your own stale air. If you do manage to peer out through the slits, congratulations! Your reward is the realization that you still can't move fast enough to dodge anything. Problem number 3, falling down. In the movies, knights barrel through the chaos like unstoppable tanks. In reality, if you trip in the mud, you are done. You do not get back up gracefully. You thrash on the ground, arms and legs clanging like a dropped toolbox, while everyone else tramples past. Best case, a friend hauls you to your feet, rolling his eyes. Worst case, you are left there until someone decides your armor looks better without you in it. And let's not forget the smell. Remember Chapter 1? Now imagine that smell locked inside a steel can with you. Every drop of sweat just soaks the padding until you're essentially wearing a sponge that reeks of despair. Knights trained for years to endure this agony. And you? You can barely handle carrying groceries up a flight of stairs. 10 minutes into your armor, you are praying for a cool breeze, a chair, and maybe a sports drink. But there are no chairs, no breezes, and the only drink is warm ale that smells like regret. So yes, armor makes you look formidable from a distance. Up close, you are wobbling, panting, and trying not to pass out. Far from invincible, you are essentially a medieval baked potato waiting to be peeled. The invisible killer. Arrows. You imagine the medieval battle as sword versus sword, face-to-face and dramatic speeches. In reality, you are likely to be introduced to an arrow before you see the enemy. Archers were the medieval version of remote customer service. Impersonal, effective, and guaranteed to ruin your day. They didn't need to know your name or even see your face. All they had to do was aim in the general direction of the giant crowd of sweaty soldiers, and gravity did the rest. The worst part is that you don't hear the one meant for you. Arrows are not cinematic. There is no warning whistle, no slow-motion shot where you lock eyes with it. It is just suddenly there. 1 second, you are gripping your spear. The next second, someone in your rank is on the ground, and you are wondering if you are next. And medieval armies didn't use a handful of archers. They used thousands. The English longbowmen at Agincourt released so many arrows that they literally darkened the sky. Imagine standing shoulder to shoulder with your nervous friends, looking up and realizing the weather forecast for today is overcast with a chance of sharp, pointy objects. Your armor? Maybe it helps, but it is not perfect. Arrowheads were designed to penetrate mail, split shields, and turn padded jacks into pincushions. If you are unlucky enough to be lightly equipped, you are not just vulnerable, you are target practice. Even if you are not hit, the psychological damage is real. Imagine dozens of your comrades dropping around you in the first few minutes, all before you even moved forward. Courage has a funny way of evaporating when the very sky seems angry at you. The only defense is to raise your shield and hope, which sounds great until you realize holding a shield above your head for more than 5 minutes feels like a heavy lifting penalty. Soon your arm is shaking, the shield is slipping, and you find yourself peering up, praying the next volley doesn't happen when you are taking a breath. So, before the swords clash or the cavalry even arrives, there is a strong chance you are already lying in the mud, muttering, "Seriously, this is how I go?" The arrow doesn't care about your training regimen, your dreams of glory, or your brand new armor polish. It just shows up uninvited like the worst party guest in history. The biological battering ram. Cavalry. You think the real threat on the medieval battlefield is the knight. Incorrect. It is the half-ton giant animal he's riding. Horses were not just transportation. They were biological battering rams on legs. And the moment you see one hurtling toward you, you realize your place in history is to be part of the road. A war horse is not some friendly, placid pony nibbling sugar cubes from your hand. These were specially bred destriers, muscled, armored, and trained to trample everything in their path. Imagine 2,000 pounds of rage moving at 30 miles per hour. You don't fight that. You become part of the landscape. The sound alone is terrifying. Dozens, sometimes hundreds of hoofs pounding across the field, making the ground shake. It doesn't sound like a battle anymore. It sounds like the earth itself is coming to crush you. By the time the rider lowers his lance, you are already trying to decide if you would prefer to be crushed, impaled, or both. You think your spear will save you, maybe if you are standing firm in a disciplined formation, but you are not standing. You are panicking, sweating in your armored sauna, and wishing you had stayed home to tend the fields. The first rider barrels into you, and your spear is shaking in your hands as if it were made of paper. The horses can smell fear, or maybe they're just too focused on turning you into a speed bump to care. And if the lance doesn't get you, the sheer momentum will. People imagine knights gracefully jousting, but in battle it is chaos. Riders slam into the ranks, horses kick out sideways, and men fly apart. One solid hoof kick to the chest, and you don't need a second opinion from a medieval doctor. You are done. Even if you dodge the first wave, you are not safe. Cavalry won't politely wait their turn. They wheel around and charge again, trampling anyone unlucky enough to still be on the ground. At this point, you are less a soldier and more a patch of muddy carpet. In stories, cavalry charges are noble and awe-inspiring. In reality, they're just horrifying. The knight may be aiming for honor, the horse is aiming for maximum flattening, and between them, your chances of lasting even a minute are diminishing faster than your bravery. The inner enemy, friendly fire. You probably think your deadliest foe on the battlefield is the opposing army, but the real danger is the guy standing right behind you. Welcome to the wonderful world of friendly fire, Medieval Edition. Forget modern precision weaponry. Medieval warfare was close quarters, chaotic, and sweaty. When thousands of men are packed into dense formations, swinging sharp objects with trembling hands, someone is bound to get hit the wrong way. And spoiler, it's usually you. First, there's the spear problem. Spears are long, unwieldy, and hard to aim in a crowd. The guy behind you is trying to poke an enemy, but he pokes you in the back of the leg instead. Congratulations, you've just been skewered, and the battle hasn't even properly started. Then come the swords. Forget elegant duels. Picture exhausted men blindly hacking in all directions, hoping they hit something that isn't wearing their own colors. With all the smoke, shouting, and general panic, they can barely see you anyway. If you're lucky, the worst you'll get is a dent in your helmet. If not, well, let's just say you won't be sending thank you notes to your teammates. And don't even get me started on the archers. Arrows don't always fly forward. Sometimes they misfire. Sometimes they ricochet. Sometimes the wind just decides it doesn't like you. It's bad enough to be terrified of the enemy archers. It's worse when you realize you also have to survive your own side's assistance. Even movement is dangerous. Picture this. Your commander yells, "Charge!" and everyone rushes forward like an angry herd. You stumble, fall, and before you can get up, 50 of your closest friends have already stepped on you. No hard feelings, of course. They're just trying not to die. Medieval courtesy only went so far. The veterans knew this. That's why they stood on the edges of the formation, where the only danger was the actual enemy. You, on the other hand, are stuck in the middle, surrounded by amateurs who still can't tell their left from their right. Every time someone swings, you flinch, because half the danger is in your own ranks. So yes, the enemy can be terrifying. But sometimes survival means keeping an eye on Steve from your village, who is currently swinging his axe like he's chopping firewood and doesn't realize your head isn't a log. On the medieval battlefield, friendly was just a figure of speech. The earth as a weapon. The mud slaughter. You managed to stay on your feet through the mud, the arrows, the horses, and even the occasional hoof print on your ribs. You tell yourself, okay, maybe I can survive this. And that is when it happens. You realize the very battlefield is trying to get you. Because in the Middle Ages, mud wasn't just mud. It was a weapon. Here is how it works. Thousands of men and horses tramp over the same patch of ground for hours. It doesn't matter if you started on dry grass. Within minutes, it turns into soup. a viscous, sucking slurry that clings to your boots and laughs at your attempts to move. Every step feels like you're trying to walk through porridge. Now picture yourself burdened by 50 pounds of armor. You take one false step, sink in up to your knee, and suddenly you're stuck. You try to pull your leg out, but your boot decides it would rather stay behind. You wobble, fall, and before you know it, you're lying face down in medieval quicksand. And here's the fun part. No one stops to help you. Not because they don't care, but because they can't. When men are panicking and surging, you're just another obstacle in the muck. Soldiers step on you, horses splash over you, and all the while you're trying to breathe through a helmet that is slowly filling with mud. So much for your glorious duel under the sun. Even if you manage to get back up, you're exhausted. Your legs feel like lead, your armor is packed with filth, and every step is slower than the last. Meanwhile, the arrows and the cavalry don't care that you're essentially fighting while standing in wet cement. You have become the easiest target on the field. And it wasn't just you. Entire armies bogged down in marshy terrain. In battles like Agincourt, knights drowned in the mud before they reached the enemy. Imagine being one of the most fearsome warriors of your time, only to be defeated by a puddle. Not exactly the ending you once sang about in the taverns. So when you picture yourself tall and brave, standing on the battlefield, don't forget the ground beneath your feet, because in the Middle Ages, the earth itself seemed determined to drag you down, literally. In short, you don't need the enemy to defeat you. A sloppy patch of farmland will do the job perfectly well. You manage to stay on your feet through the mud, the arrows, and the occasional hoof print on your ribs. You tell yourself, okay, maybe I can survive this. And that is when it happens. Someone near you panics. And like a yawn in a crowded room, panic is contagious. It starts small, the contagion of panic. One soldier looks over his shoulder and notices that half the formation looks less like a disciplined army and more like a group of villagers playing dress-up with sharp objects. He mutters something, takes one step back, and suddenly his neighbor thinks the retreat has begun. Within seconds, 3 more men are running. A minute later, the entire line is dissolving like a poorly baked cake. You want to be brave, to stand your ground. But bravery is not so appealing when everyone around you is running for the hills. Because here is the thing about human instinct. When 50 men are running in one direction, your brain doesn't think, hold steady. It thinks, run, you idiot! And medieval commanders knew this. That's why they shouted until they were hoarse, waving flags and blowing horns, trying to convince men to stand in neat rows while cavalry hurtled toward them. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. When it didn't, the field became a stampede of armored men tripping over each other, with horses and carts adding extra chaos to the mix. Here's the kicker. You don't even have to panic first. Someone else's fear infects you. You feel the press of bodies. You hear the shouts of retreat, whether they are true or not. And suddenly, your spear is on the ground and your legs are pumping faster than your brain can process. You'll tell yourself later that you were being a strategist, but deep down you know you just joined the medieval equivalent of a Black Friday crowd, only with more sharp edges. And panic wasn't just embarrassing, it was dangerous. Soldiers trampled each other in the rush, carts overturned, and people were crushed by their own comrades. You could survive the arrows and spears, only to be flattened by your best friend because he couldn't take the pressure. So yes, panic is contagious. On the battlefield, it spreads faster than the plague, and like the plague, it rarely ends well for you. The symphony of chaos. The noise. You always thought the battlefield would sound cinematic. Trumpets blaring, swords clanging, maybe a few courageous grunts. Instead, what actually breaks you is not the fighting, but the noise. The first thing you notice is the screaming. Thousands of men yelling all at once. war cries, commands, curses, and the occasional, "Where is my boot?" It is not a heroic chorus, it is chaos with lungs. You cannot figure out if your commander is ordering you to advance, hold, or go home to milk the cows. Then come the drums and horns, presumably meant to organize the army. In practice, they just add to the confusion. You hear one horn, but so does the enemy, and suddenly you're wondering if you have charged when you should be holding steady. Layered over that are the sounds of impact. Steel on steel does not make a noble clang. It makes a grating scorch, a scrape, a sound that rattles your teeth. Every blow reverberates through your skull via your helmet, leaving you stunned as if you've been ringing a bell with your head all day. And then there are the horses. Horses do not make polite neighs in battle. They scream. A war horse squealing at a full run is not majestic. It is the sound of nature reminding you that you are very small and very crushable. Now add the human element. People do not die quietly. They moan, they howl, and they call for their mothers in voices that cut through all the other noise. You are not ready for that. And suddenly, your grand fantasy of being a hero feels more like standing in the middle of a very loud nightmare. The result is, you can't think, you can't concentrate, you can't even hear yourself breathing inside your helmet. Your brain simply shuts down under the assault of sound. That smart plan you had about keeping cool under pressure, it's gone. Your body is wildly swinging a weapon just to keep up, hoping you hit the right people. So no, you weren't broken by a sword in the chest or an arrow in the leg. You were broken by the sheer, overwhelming cacophony of thousands of scared, angry, desperate men packed together. It is not glorious, it is deafening. And when you finally emerge from the chaos, if you survive at all, your ears will still be ringing, a medieval souvenir you didn't ask for. The overrated sword. You probably imagined yourself charging into battle with a shining sword, hacking left and right like the star of a historical epic. I hate to break it to you, but swords are the most overrated weapon on the field. In fact, if you brought one, you've already made your first mistake. First, swords were expensive. Unless you were a noble or had a very generous employer, you probably didn't even have one. You'd be stuck with a spear, an axe, or perhaps just the sharpened stick if your lord was really cutting corners. Which is bad news, because in your fantasy, you were definitely the cool blade guy, not the one nervously poking from 10 feet away. Secondly, swords were not even that practical. Spears dominated the battlefields because they kept the danger far away, which is to say, over there with the other guy, and not in your personal space. You, with your shiny sword, have to get up close. This means that in order to look like a hero, you have essentially volunteered to enter the striking radius. Thirdly, you are not trained. Knights trained since childhood to fight with heavy blades, practicing drills every day until their arms look like tree trunks. You, however, have spent most of your life scrolling, driving, and maybe going to the gym 3 times a week if you are really motivated. When you try to swing, it's less a valorous strike and more a, "Why does my shoulder hurt already?" flail. And don't forget, battles were not neat duels. They were packed, sweaty crowds where swinging a long blade was more likely to slice your neighbor than your enemy. In fact, many soldiers intentionally dulled their swords for close quarters combat, turning them into glorified clubs. So much for your elegant fencing style. Even if you do land a blow, your sword is likely not cutting through armor like in the movies. Mail, padded jackets, and helmets were designed to resist blades. You will be swinging with all your might, and the other guy will just sigh grumpily before introducing you to his much more practical spear point. So yes, swords look great on movie posters and in museum displays, but on the battlefield, they are heavy, clumsy, and mostly symbolic. If you thought you were going to walk into glory with Excalibur in hand, think again. You are not King Arthur. You are just a tired guy holding a very expensive mistake. The champions of germs, disease. Congratulations, you have made it this far. You dodged the arrows, avoided being crushed by the horses, and even survived Steve's accidental axe blow. But here's the kicker. Even if the battlefield doesn't finish you, disease almost certainly will, because medieval armies had one quiet, patient warrior who never lost: germs. Let's start with the camps. You were living in a temporary city of thousands of stressed, sweaty soldiers packed together. Everyone is eating from dirty pots, sharing spoons, and drinking the same warm ale that's been sitting in a barrel since last week. Clean water? Don't make me laugh. If you drink from a stream, chances are you are also sipping whatever contributions the horses and soldiers left upstream. Then the food. You think you're a cool modern survivalist because you once ate a gas station hot dog. Try chewing on hard bread full of weevils, or meat that smells suspicious but is probably not going to make you sick. Spoiler, it does. And once it hits your stomach, you're out of the fight faster than any sword could manage. Infections. Oh, they are everywhere. Remember that tiny scratch you got on your arm adjusting your armor? In the modern world, that is a Band-Aid situation. In the medieval world, that is an invitation for bacteria to throw a party. Within a week, your arm is swollen, you have a fever, and the camp doctor is advising either prayer or amputation, sometimes both. And let's not forget the big names: dysentery, typhus, and the plague. Dysentery alone could wipe out more soldiers than the enemy's swords ever did. It is hard to look like a hero when you spend most of the battle running for the bushes. Typhus spreads like wildfire in crowded tents, and the plague, well, let's just say you don't want to be in an army camp when that guest shows up. The cruelest part? Disease did not discriminate. Peasant or knight, you were equally vulnerable. The most opulent armor in the world could not stop contaminated water or a flea bite. You might survive the battlefield itself, only to spend the next week curled up in agony, wondering if being stabbed wouldn't have been quicker. So even if you avoided the mud, the arrows, and the horses, disease was patiently waiting in the wings, ready to take you out anyway. On the medieval battlefield, microbes were the real champions, and you were always on their team. The thermoregulation of despair. The weather. You might have thought the danger on the battlefield came from the weapons, but no, what finishes you is the weather. Welcome to the medieval climate experience. Half sauna, half freezer, all misery. Let's start with the heat. You are wrapped in layers of padding, mail, and metal, essentially medieval winter wear in July. Within minutes, you are sweating like you are in a sauna with no exit. Your helmet holds every ounce of heat until your brain feels like it is being slowly cooked. You can't wipe your brow because your hands are busy trying to hold your spear, so the sweat just pours into your eyes. Vision gone, dignity gone. You tell yourself you'll power through, but then the dizziness hits. Heat stroke is not glamorous. You do not fall dramatically after a noble duel. You slump over, like an overheated tourist at Disneyland, except instead of a water bottle, you are given a bucket of warm ale that somehow makes it worse. And then, as soon as the sun goes down, the battlefield changes character. The heat vanishes, and now you are shivering in damp clothes. You are sleeping on the ground, no tents, no sleeping bags, just grass that feels suspiciously like a sponge. That sweaty armor padding that was baking you during the day is now an icy sponge wrapped around your chest. The luxury of a campfire is out too. If you're lucky, maybe you cluster with a few equally miserable soldiers and share body heat. If you are unlucky, you are alone, teeth chattering loud enough to alert the enemy. The night is long, dark, and full of regret. mostly regret that you didn't stay home and fake a bad ankle when the call-up came. The worst thing is, this cycle repeats every day. Hot during the fight, freezing at night. Your body can't cope. You're exhausted, dehydrated, and one strong gust of wind away from tears. Medieval warfare was not just about the clash of armies. It was about surviving the world's most severe outdoor camping trip, only without the marshmallows or the sandwiches to make it tolerable. So while the movies show heroic knights fighting tirelessly under banners, the truth is that half the army was either passing out in the sun or shivering in the dark. And you'd be doing both. The ration of despair and captivity. You might assume that medieval soldiers marched into battle well-fed, ready to swing their swords and shout slogans. Wrong. On the battlefield, food was not fuel. It was a punishment. Let's start with the bread, if you can call it that. Hard as a rock, baked weeks ago, and teeming with tiny weevil neighbors who don't pay rent. You don't eat the bread. You gnaw at it like a frustrated beaver until your jaw aches. If you are lucky, you soften it in ale. If you are unlucky, you crack a tooth, and now you have a dental emergency in the worst place on earth. Next, the meat. You dream of roasted chicken, maybe a good stew. Instead, you get salted pork, packed so long ago it smells of desperation. Fresh meat exists, but only if you are fast enough to grab it before it spoils in the sun, or before the nobles eat all of it. For you, it's usually rancid scraps that test your stomach's loyalty. And let's just say, stomachs are not loyal. Vegetables? Don't make me laugh. The closest you get to a green is the grass you collapse on when your digestion betrays you. Fruit, if it appears, is already fermenting. Congratulations, you have discovered the medieval version of kombucha, except instead of improving your health, it sends you running for the bushes. And water. Oh, precious water! Clean water is a myth. Streams are shared with horses, laundry, and soldiers relieving themselves upstream. So your choice is drink the foul water and gamble with disease, or stick to the ale. Sounds fine, right? Wrong. The ale is not refreshing. It is warm, weak, and smells suspiciously like someone tried to brew regret in a bucket. The result? You are perpetually exhausted, dehydrated, and one bad meal away from being permanently sidelined. Instead of feeling strong and battle-ready, you are sluggish, weak, and wondering if the enemy camp has better nutrition. Spoiler, they don't. Meanwhile, your commander is eating fresh bread, roasted meat, and actual wine beneath a silk tent. You, on the other hand, are licking crumbs from your gauntlet and trying to convince yourself that hunger builds character. It doesn't. It just cultivates misery. So forget the visions of pre-battle feasts. Your ration is barely a ration. It is a cruel reminder that even if the enemy doesn't destroy you, indigestion probably will. The prisoner's fate. You somehow dodged the arrows, survived the mud, and even stood up to the weevil-ridden bread. For one glorious moment, you think you'll survive. Then the enemy surrounds you. Your weapon is knocked from your hand, and you realize you won't die dramatically in the muck. You are about to be captured, which is somehow worse. If you are a nobleman, there is a small chance you'll be fine. You might be taken prisoner for ransom, which means your wealthy family will fork over enough gold to buy you back. You'll spend a few months as an unwelcome house guest, likely eating better than your men ever did, before being sent home with a slightly bruised ego. Not ideal, but survivable. But you are not a nobleman, are you? You are just you. And that means no ransom, no cozy prison tent, no friendly negotiations. For the common foot soldier, capture was essentially the medieval version of you lost the game and now the DLC is misery. Best case, you are enslaved. That's right, congratulations, you now belong to someone else. Hope you enjoy a lifetime of farm labor in a country that doesn't even speak your language. Worst case, the enemy considers you an inconvenience. Feeding prisoners costs money after all, and armies didn't like spending money on anything other than sharper objects. Even if you aren't executed immediately, the humiliation alone is enough to break you. Stripped of your armor, shoved into a group of equally miserable men, you realize you're not a proud warrior. You are cargo, and every passing soldier reminds you of it with a sneer. Then there is the psychological torture. You have no idea if you will ever see home again. Maybe you'll be traded. Maybe you'll rot in a makeshift dungeon. Maybe tomorrow someone will decide they are bored and you are the entertainment. Medieval law did not include a handbook on prisoners' rights. At least death on the battlefield would have been quick, however messy. Capture is slow, drawn out, and filled with uncertainty. Every day is another reminder that you were important enough to survive, but not important enough to matter. So yes, you thought surrendering was the safe option. Instead, you just signed up for a medieval loyalty program where the reward for surviving is misery, hard labor, and maybe, if you're lucky, an escape story no one will believe. You made it farther than anyone expected. The arrows missed, the horses trampled someone else, and you even managed to survive Steve's accidental spear poke. For a brief, bright moment, you imagined this might all end in a ballad sung about you in the tavern. Then reality sets in. Your glorious ending will be anything but glorious. First, let's talk about surrender. You think if you drop your weapon, raise your hands, and look sufficiently pathetic, the enemy will accept you. That's sweet. The truth is, no one has time for prisoners when the field is full of chaos. If you're lucky, you'll be ignored. If you're unlucky, you'll be dealt with by someone who doesn't want the hassle. Medieval mercy was inconsistent at best. Okay, maybe you picture a heroic duel, a noble knight against a worthy opponent, blades clashing until one falls. That's sweet also. In real battlefields, no one wastes time on honor duels. Your ending is more likely to be a messy pile-up, with 3 different weapons hitting you from 3 different directions. The chroniclers never write about that part. Or maybe you think, at least my commander will notice. Sorry, no. He's already galloping away to safety, leaving you to become a cautionary tale about why you shouldn't have trusted the banners. The truth is, nobody cares about your individual bravery. Armies don't remember individuals, they remember numbers, and you're just one of them. The best, glorious ending. Someone might strip you, take your armor, and tell a story about how they overcame the enemy soldier. Congratulations, you've been downgraded from a human to an anecdote. Worst case, you are buried in a mass grave, unnamed and forgotten, while the chroniclers write poems about how noble the lords were. And let's be honest, even if you died in a technically impressive way, no one back home will ever hear the details. Your mother will get the short version. He fought bravely, which actually translates to, we don't know what happened, probably the mud. So much for your glorious ending. Instead of being remembered as a legend, you'll be remembered as that guy who didn't come back. True glory goes to the storytellers, not the ones lying on the field. The legacy of silence. So, here you are. You sweated, stumbled, dodged arrows, ate questionable bread, and stared down war horses. You survived the panic, the mud, and even the clumsy friendly fire from Steve. You made it to the end. Surely all that suffering means something. Surely your name will echo in history. Not quite. In the Middle Ages, unless you were a nobleman, a commander, or someone who married into a very complicated family tree, your legacy amounted to nothing. Chroniclers did not waste ink on common soldiers. They wrote about kings, dukes, and the occasional dramatic nobleman who tripped over his spear. You, the anonymous foot soldier, merely became part of a body count. Best case, the army lost 3,000 men. Congratulations! You are one of the 3,000. And let's assume you did something impressive. Maybe you held the line for a few extra minutes, or you actually managed to knock a knight off his horse. Will you be remembered for it? No. The glory is attributed to your lord, who was probably sitting on a hill strategizing while you did the actual work. Back home, your family might remember you for a while. But even then, it's not as a hero. It's as the one who didn't return, which is less epic and more depressing. The villagers will nod solemnly for a few weeks before getting on with their lives, because survival doesn't stop to honor the fallen. Meanwhile, the songs and poems about the battle focus entirely on the nobility. The peasants who fought, bled, and froze in the mud, they are set dressing. No one is singing about you. No one is carving your name on a monument. Your armor is scavenged. Your body goes into the pit, and history forgets you existed. And if you think your spirit will live on in tavern tales, think again. The only stories people love are about outlaws, kings, or saints who did something flashy. You are just the guy who went to war. That is the final truth of the medieval battlefield. It did not matter how brave you were, how long you lasted, or how miserable your final moments were. Your legacy was silence. You dreamed of glory. History gave you anonymity. The art of survival. The garden as insurance. The cunning of the medieval peasant garden. For the medieval peasant, the garden was not merely a plot of greenery behind the cottage. It was the thin line between starvation and survival. Unlike the decorative yards of the nobility or the vast tracts managed by monasteries, the peasant's garden was a tenacious, stubborn little patch of earth carved out of necessity. Every square foot mattered. Every seed had a purpose. There was no room here for luxury, only life, sustenance, and the hope of lasting through the seasons. It was often the women of the household who held the secrets of this small Eden. From mother to daughter, grandmother to granddaughter, knowledge flowed like an invisible inheritance. Which herbs eased stomach cramps, which roots could fight a fever, and which bitter leaves could save a sick cow. This knowledge was not written in books, for books belonged to the clergy. Instead, this wisdom lived in memory, in calloused hands, and in quiet rituals repeated with the turning of the moon. The peasant garden was a marvel of efficiency. In one cramped corner, you would find onions huddled next to carrots, an early form of companion planting. The sharp scent of the onions repelled the pests that might chew on the carrots. A row of beans might vine up wooden poles, while peas shared the soil beneath, enriching it with nutrients that made it fertile for the next round of planting. Nothing was planted by accident. Every pairing had a logic, what we would call organic farming today. But for them, it was simply a survival strategy. Even household waste found its way back into the earth. Animal manure, kitchen scraps, and rotting straw were collected into smelly piles, slowly composting into a rich nourishment that breathed new life into tired soil. This was messy, back-breaking work, but it meant the difference between a harvest and an empty table. And above all, the garden was timed to the heavens. Peasants had no clocks, but they had the phases of the moon. Seeds might be sown during a waxing moon, when the increasing light promised strong shoots, or harvested when the moon was waning, which was believed to ensure better storage. These rhythms connected the peasants to cycles far greater than themselves, aligning their survival with the turning of the sky. For these families, the garden was not just food, it was medicine, security, and tradition, a lifeline dug into the soil, nourishing not only the body, but the resilience of people who had no other safety net. The secret of companion planting. One of the cleverest tricks the medieval peasant used, though they would not have called it agricultural science, was the practice we now call companion planting. For the peasant, this wasn't theory, it was pattern recognition, born of centuries of observing what grew well together and what stubbornly refused to share the soil. If carrots thrived when planted next to onions, you didn't argue. You planted more carrots next to more onions. Take the classic onion and carrot partnership. The strong smell of the onion masked the scent of the carrot, confusing the dreaded carrot fly that might otherwise devastate the bed. Meanwhile, the delicate foliage of the carrot didn't compete with the spiky onion leaves, so they grew harmoniously, neither stealing light nor space. Peasants may not have explained it in terms of pest deterrence and non-competing root systems, but they saw the results in fuller harvest baskets. Then there were the legumes, beans and peas. These humble plants carried a secret weapon in their roots, the ability to enrich the soil itself. Peasants may not have known the word nitrogen, but they knew that after a plot grew beans, other crops planted there grew stronger. So beans and peas would often be cycled through the garden, acting as invisible fertilizer factories, keeping the soil alive rather than deplete it. Herbs also played a role. Dill might be tucked in between rows of cabbage to distract pests, while sage and thyme acted as little green shields, driving away insects and later flavoring the stew. Some plants even served as sacrificial victims. Nasturtiums, for example, drew hungry insects away from the vegetables. From the peasant's perspective, this meant that while the nasturtiums looked ragged and chewed, the cabbage beside them remained crisp and whole, a worthy exchange. What is striking is how the peasants wove together food, medicine, and protection into one small patch of earth. Every plant was part of a larger strategy. Even flowers were not purely ornamental. Marigolds might brighten the garden while repelling pests and soothing skin when brewed into a salve. Nothing was wasted, not even beauty. Through this network of partnerships, the medieval peasant garden became more than the sum of its parts. It was an ecosystem, carefully balanced through observation and experience. By planting with purpose, the peasants tricked nature into working for them, turning a bare patch of ground into a self-sustaining engine of survival. If the medieval peasant garden had a secret ingredient, it was not some rare herb or forgotten spellbook. It was manure. Yes, ordinary, smelly, inevitable manure. Cows, sheep, pigs, chickens, whose ever waste it was as valuable as their milk, wool, or eggs. To the modern mind, this might sound unglamorous, but in a world without chemical fertilizers, animal waste was liquid gold, or, more accurately, steaming brown gold. The process was simple, though not entirely pleasant. Manure was collected and piled together with kitchen scraps, old straw, and any organic material that could be spared. Over time, this unsightly mountain transformed. Heat built up inside the pile. Worms burrowed through it, and decay slowly worked its alchemy. Weeks or months later, what was once a repulsive heap became rich, crumbly compost, dark earth that smelled less of waste and more of life. The peasants noticed the difference immediately. Where compost was spread, the soil remained looser, the crops grew taller, and the harvest looked far more promising. Without it, the ground grew stubborn, hard, and less generous year after year. Composting, though not given a fancy name, was a cornerstone of survival. There was even a rhythm to its use. Manure from different animals had different reputations. Cow manure was prized for its consistency and reliability. Pig manure for being strong and sometimes too potent if not aged properly. While chicken droppings were considered fiery material, too hot to be applied fresh without scorching the plants. Every peasant learned this through trial and error
and probably a few tragically ruined carrot patches sacrificed along the way. The recycling didn't stop there. Nothing organic was wasted. Potato peelings, cabbage stalks, even bones from a stew might be tossed into the compost heap, eventually breaking down into nutrients. This was the cycle that kept the garden alive. The animals fed the family, their waste fed the soil, and the soil fed the plants and the animals and the people again. In a strange way, the compost heap was the medieval version of the peasants' modern recycling. It turned refuse into hope, and dirt into food. And though no one wrote poems about it, every family that survived a winter owed its gratitude to the humble, smelly miracle of manure.
The lunar calendar, the celestial textbook. For the medieval peasant, the sky was more than a backdrop for stars. It was a clock, a calendar, and sometimes a whispering guide. Without printed almanacs in every home, peasants looked to the most reliable timekeeper they had, the moon. Its waxing and waning became a sort of agricultural manual, believed to influence the pull of growth in plants, just as it stirred the tides of the sea. Seeds were never scattered carelessly. The waxing moon, swelling toward fullness, was believed to draw the sap upwards, encouraging strong shoots and leafy growth. This was the time for crops that grew above the ground: peas, beans, lettuce, herbs. The light of the filling moon promised energy, so women saved their best seeds for these nights, dropping them into the soil as the silvery light spilled over the fields. When the moon began to wane, shrinking toward darkness, its pull was thought to sink deep into the earth. This was the season for root crops: onions, carrots, turnips, vegetables that needed to burrow into the soil to thrive. To plant them under a growing moon would be inviting disappointment. To plant them under a shrinking moon was to align with the hidden currents of nature. Even harvesting and preserving were timed to the heavens. Herbs intended for medicine were best gathered at dawn, with the dew still on the leaves, preferably during a waxing moon, when their potency was believed to be fullest. Grain for storage was ideally cut when the moon was waning, its pull said to hold off rot and pests. These practices were not idle superstitions. For a family with no surplus, even small improvements meant survival. Of course, not every peasant looked at the stars philosophically. Some grumbled about the timing, muttering that the moon's influence didn't matter as much as the weather or the Lord's tax collector. Yet over generations, enough success aligned with lunar planting that the tradition endured. To ignore it felt reckless, almost like insulting a power far greater than yourself. Thus, every garden was not only rooted in the soil, but anchored to the sky. Medieval peasants may have been bound to the earth, but their gaze remained upward, measuring their fortune by the luminous arc of the moon. The family apothecary, medicine and herbs. For the medieval peasant, the garden was more than just a food source. It was the family apothecary. When sickness struck, there was no rushing to the doctor. Physicians were rare, expensive, and often reserved for the lords, monasteries, or wealthy townsfolk. For everyone else, healing came in the form of leaves, roots, and flowers, carefully cultivated just outside the door. Every peasant woman carried a mental catalog of cures. Chamomile soothed stomach aches and restless sleep. Yarrow, with its feathery leaves, was prized for staunching the blood of wounds and aiding fevers. Garlic was not only for seasoning stew, it was crushed and eaten as a remedy for coughs and infection. If a child had worms, wormwood lived up to its name. If a man ached from laboring in the field, comfrey could be mashed into a poultice to ease swelling. The line between food and medicine was often blurred. Parsley garnished a dish, but also aided digestion. Cabbage leaves could be eaten in stew or applied to a sore joint. Even the humblest onion was considered a panacea.
eaten raw for colds, boiled for coughs, and applied to wounds as a crude antiseptic. To the medieval mind, nature had filled the garden with answers to almost every ailment, if only one knew where to look. Of course, some remedies were as much ritual as cure. Herbs were gathered at dawn, sometimes with a quiet prayer, for the morning dew was believed to carry potency. Certain plants were cut only with a clean blade, others only when the moon was waxing. A sprinkle of superstition clung to every cure. Did it always work? Perhaps not. But when the choice was between trying a handful of sage or doing nothing, the peasants put their faith in the green world. The garden also provided cures for livestock, a vital resource, as a sick cow or a lame ox could mean disaster. Nettle was fed to improve milk, garlic was given to chickens for health, and bitter herbs were mixed into fodder to combat parasites. The same plot of land that sustained the people also protected their animals. In short, the medieval garden was not just about calories, it was about resilience. Every herb growing there carried the memory of sickness survived, lessons learned, and knowledge passed on. For the peasants, these plants were both a lifeline and a legacy. The rhythms of the year and communal knowledge. The medieval peasant garden was never static. It pulsed with the rhythm of the seasons. To survive, families had to think months ahead, planning not just for today's meal, but for the survival of the next winter. Each season carried its own challenges, rituals, and risks. Spring was the season of hope and grueling labor. As the frost retreated, women and children turned the soil, breaking up clumps with wooden tools and scattering the precious manure from the pile. Seeds for peas, onions, and lettuce were buried in the warming earth. It was a time of nerves and prayers, for a late frost or too much rain could wipe out weeks of effort overnight. Families sowed not just crops, but their luck for the year. Summer brought growth, but also vigilance. Gardens were constantly weeded, for weeds were relentless rivals. Children were sent to shoo birds or chase chickens away from tender sprouts. Herbs were cut midsummer when their oils were said to be at their strongest, and some crops, like dill or fennel, were dried and stored for both flavor and medicine. Summer was a balance of harvesting enough for the daily meal while carefully preserving the best for the leaner months. Autumn was the harvest season, the moment of truth. Carrots and turnips were pulled from the ground and packed into cellars or straw-lined pits. Cabbage was hung upside down or salted in barrels. Beans and peas were dried for winter stews, and onions and garlic braided into long ropes to hang in smoky kitchens. Families measured their survival in baskets and bundles, hoping their stores would last until spring returned. Winter was the long test. Gardens fell silent, dusted with frost. Yet the work continued indoors. Herbs dried in the summer were brewed into teas for fever. Stored roots were carefully rationed, stretched to last until the earth softened again. Some families even sprouted beans inside clay pots by the fire for a bit of fresh green when the snow seemed endless. This cycle was relentless, repeating year after year. Missing a season, planting too late, or misjudging a harvest could mean starvation. But when the rhythm was kept, the peasant garden became more than just a patch of land. It became a compass, guiding families through the harsh rotation of the medieval year. Collective survival. While each peasant family maintained its own small plot of land, no garden existed in isolation. Villages were woven together by necessity, and the exchange of seeds, cuttings, and hard-won advice was as much a part of survival as the planting itself. One household might possess an especially hardy variety of bean, while another stored a strain of onion that kept longer through the winter. Over time, this exchange created a living library of plants, passed from hand to hand like heirlooms. Women were often the hub of this quiet trade. When neighbors gathered at the well or in the churchyard, the gossip might be seasoned with gardening secrets: how to keep slugs off the lettuce, which patch flourished despite the drought, or which herb cured a stubborn cough. Knowledge was not hoarded, it was exchanged, weaving itself into the fabric of communal life. A crop failure in one home could sometimes be compensated by the bounty of another, for everyone knew that next year the roles might be reversed. The gardens also connected the peasants to the wider web of tradition. Feasts and festivals often started in the soil. Garlic and leeks seasoned the stews shared at midsummer gatherings. Herbs like sage and thyme flavored the communal bread. Even small celebrations like a wedding or a christening drew their bounty from many gardens, stitched together into a shared meal that bound neighbors as tightly as kinship. And yet, the community could also foster quiet rivalry. Who had the earliest peas? Who managed to keep their cabbage free of rot? Who brewed the strongest nettle beer or the most soothing chamomile tea? Pride slipped between the rows of beans as surely as the weeds, and a well-kept garden was a mark of diligence, even status, among peasants who had little else to boast of. Nevertheless, in the lean years, when blight, pests, or weather threatened the harvest, the gardens became lifelines not just for families, but for entire villages. The shared seed stock ensured survival, and the collective knowledge helped rebuild what was lost. These small plots of soil were not merely private enterprises, they were threads in a larger tapestry of survival. In the end, the medieval peasant garden was not just a source of food and medicine, it was also a bond between neighbors, a symbol of resilience, and a reminder that in a world of uncertainty, survival was always a communal act. The medieval peasant garden was small, often no more than a fenced-in plot tucked against the family hut. Yet within its boundaries lay the heartbeat of survival. These gardens never had the blinding beauty of noble estates or the scholarly prestige of monastic plots, but to the peasant family, their humble garden was worth more than gold. It fed, healed, and sustained them through the endless cycle of labor and uncertainty. Every row of onions or beans was a thread in a tapestry of resilience. Companion planting kept pests at bay without the need for powders or potions. Compost piles transformed waste into life. The moon phases, read in the night sky, guided the timing of planting and harvest. And the herbs doubled as medicine, replacing the doctors the peasants could rarely afford. All these tricks converged into a survival strategy learned not in schools, but in the soil, kept alive in memory and guarded by tradition. What makes these gardens remarkable is not just their practicality, but their legacy. The methods the peasants relied upon, companion planting, natural composting, herbal medicine, echo in today's conversations about sustainability and organic farming. What we now call eco-conscious living was, for them, simply life. Their survival instincts became an unbroken chain passed down through the centuries, shaping practices still alive in rural villages across Europe. And yet, beyond the practicality, these gardens offered something deeper, a sense of control in a world where peasants had very little. Taxes, weather, war, famine, these were forces beyond their reach. But in their gardens, with their own hands, the peasants could carve out a measure of security. A row of onions meant fewer hungry nights. A pot of sage tea meant hope against a fever. Even a single sprig of thyme drying on the rafters was a quiet act of defiance against the fragility of life. The medieval garden, thus, was more than earth and plants. It was memory and resilience, a partnership between people and the natural world. In its tangled rows and compost piles, the peasants built not just food for the body, but a legacy of endurance. proof that even in the harshest conditions, human ingenuity can bloom from the soil.